My name is Elena Carter. I'm 30 years old, a systems analyst based in Chicago, and until last winter, I thought I had a pretty decent grasp of what love, family, and legacy meant. I had a clean apartment, a good job with a startup in the loop, and a fiancé who could make a room laugh with nothing more than a smirk and a raised brow. From the outside, my life probably looked polished, like one of those Instagram reels where every coffee is perfectly frothed and every smile just right. But the truth? It cracked open one rainy night when I found out that the people who raised me weren't who they claimed to be. And the man I was supposed to marry? Well, let's just say betrayal comes easy when someone knows you're already used to being overlooked. If you've ever found yourself wondering whether you truly belonged to the people you called family, if you've ever felt like you were tolerated, not treasured, this story might feel familiar. And if something in my words strikes a memory or a scar, I hope you'll stay with me through the end. Maybe leave a comment, share your thoughts. Or maybe you'll feel compelled to subscribe, not just to follow my story, but because some part of you is also trying to rewrite what love is supposed to mean. Sometimes, the people who abandon you are the ones who raised you, and sometimes, the family you build is the one that saves you. I didn't always feel like an outsider, not really. Not until I was old enough to compare the way my parents looked at me to how they looked at my brother Grant. Grant was 2 years younger. He was the golden one. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the kind of smile that got him out of Saturday chores and into every school leadership role he never really earned. Our parents, Paul and Diane Carter, ran a modest law firm in Evanston. Carter & Carter. The kind of place with fake mahogany desks and tired carpeting, but just enough prestige to feel important in local circles. Growing up, I thought the difference between Grant and me was simple. He was the loud one, the funny one. I was the quiet achiever. He spilled juice on the white rug and got a wink. I forgot to carry the 1 in 3rd grade math and got 3 nights without TV. Li. By the time I was 10, I'd learned to stay in the background. Be helpful. Be invisible when needed. I told myself it was because I was mature for my age, that I didn't need the kind of affection my brother did. I was wrong. The first real fracture came when I was 15. Grant had wrecked my mom's old Honda trying to sneak out to a party. He wasn't hurt, but the car was a mess. The next morning, our father sat him down in the living room with a stern voice and a tired sigh. "Boys make mistakes," he said. No lecture. No grounding. No raised voices. A week later, I brought home a B+ in chemistry after weeks of tutoring myself because the school switched teachers mid-semester. My mother just looked at the grade, handed the paper back and said, "You used to be better at this." At the time, it just felt unfair. Now I see it for what it was. A pattern. A quiet erosion of worth. I left home at 17 for the University of Michigan, finishing early with a dual degree in mathematics and data science. I built a life by the numbers, safe, logical, structured. And in some ironic twist of fate, I ended up engaged to a man whose life was anything but. Caleb Landon, a photographer turned creative director for a local ad agency. He wore vintage boots and thrifted jackets that somehow made him look like a catalog model. He'd been raised in Montana, rode horses as a kid, and had a way of talking that made you forget what you were mad about. We met at a tech conference. I was presenting an algorithm. He was shooting a documentary about women in STEM. He smiled. I looked up from my laptop. That was it. Our relationship moved fast. Within 6 months, he was crashing at my place more often than not. By year 1, we were engaged. My parents tolerated him. Grant admired him. But even then, I noticed the shift. Mom called less. Dad skipped our engagement dinner with the excuse of a client meeting. Grant made jokes about me trapping a guy hotter than me, which Caleb laughed off, and I pretended didn't sting. But Caleb, he made me feel chosen. That illusion didn't shatter in one moment. It cracked slowly, through small lies and late nights, canceled dates, strange absences, and one too many texts he swore were from coworkers. I should have seen it sooner. I was trained to see patterns. But love, real or perceived, blinds even the most logical minds. The week everything unraveled started with a call from my Aunt Lillian, my father's younger sister. She lived in Vermont, taught literature at a small college, and sent me birthday cards that always included a second postcard tucked inside with a handwritten quote. She was also, apparently, dying. Ovarian cancer. Late stage. Diagnosed too late. "Alina," she said softly over the phone, "there's something I need to tell you before I go." I thought it was a story, a memory, some family's secret about my parents' rocky marriage or my grandmother's affair. I had no idea it would be the thing that changed everything. "I'm your biological mother." At first I laughed, actually laughed, because it was absurd. But Lillian kept speaking, her voice shaking but calm. "I was 19. Your father, Paul, he was my older brother, yes, but he and Diane were newly married, struggling to have children. They couldn't conceive. I didn't want to terminate, and they said it would stay in the family." "What are you saying?" "They adopted you. Quietly. Off the books. It was easier back then. I thought it would be better for you." I don't remember much of the next few minutes. My body was still, but my brain was screaming. Everything I knew or thought I knew spun. Photos, memories, moments. My mother brushing my hair before school. My father handing me a business card the day I turned 18 saying, "Call me if you ever need real advice." The detachment, the cool affection, the odd, almost business-like arrangement of it all. It suddenly made sense. "Why now?" I whispered. "Because I'm dying, and because I've been watching from the sidelines for 30 years. I thought they'd come to love you like their own. Maybe they did, in their way. But I can't take this truth with me. You deserve to know." I flew to Vermont that weekend. Sat by Lillian's bed, heard the full story, saw the photos, the signed affidavit, the letters never sent. She gave me a small weathered box. Inside were baby shoes, a bracelet with my name etched into the metal, and a photo of her at 19 holding me in the hospital. I looked so peaceful in her arms. She looked terrified. That night I called Caleb. He didn't pick up. I called again, straight to voicemail. Then I did something I rarely do. I opened his iPad, synced to our shared cloud. Within minutes my heartbreak found its match. Photos. A woman, blonde, laughing in his arms. My fiancé, in bed with someone who wasn't me, in the apartment I paid for. The betrayal was sharp. But it didn't shatter me the way I thought it would. Because I'd already been broken. The next day, I packed my things, left the keys on the counter, and moved into a hotel. I told no one. I sat in the quiet for 3 days, trying to decide if I should confront my parents, file a lawsuit, run away, or disappear into some cabin in Michigan with a dog and a bottle of whiskey. In the end, I did something simpler. I wrote a letter. Not to Caleb, not to my parents, to myself. I wrote about the truths I'd learned, the lies I'd accepted, the longing I had mistaken for love, and I promised myself something no one else ever had. That from this day forward, I would only fight for the kind of love that shows up. That stays, that sees. Even if I had to build it from scratch. I didn't go home after I checked out of the hotel. I didn't even call anyone. Not Caleb, not my parents, not Grant. I turned off my phone and drove north along Lakeshore Drive until the city lights faded behind me, replaced by miles of cold gray sky and winter-kissed road. I stayed in a friend's empty apartment in Evanston. Someone from college who'd gone overseas for a fellowship and had forgotten to change the locks. There was no furniture except a floor mattress and a chipped coffee mug left in the cabinet, but it was silent. And that was all I needed. The silence made room for everything else. I read Lillian's letter again, then the court documents she'd given me. My original birth certificate showing her name, not Diane's. A notarized letter signed years ago stating the informal adoption agreement. There was no formal agency, no courtroom. Just family dealing in private arrangements and unspoken expectations. I imagined my mother Diane, smiling over her morning espresso as if everything was just as it should be. I imagined my father, Paul, reading contracts all day while my existence was buried in the margins like a non-disclosure clause. I wanted to storm into their home and throw the truth at them like a brick through their perfect kitchen window. But I knew them too well. That wasn't how they'd break. That wasn't how they'd show their hand. So I made a plan. 3 days later, I showed up at their front door, a stack of documents in my bag and my heart beating like a war drum in my chest. It was a Sunday, just before noon. Diane answered, wearing her usual pressed slacks and a pearl-colored blouse, like she was hosting a tea party, not raising a child with secrets. "Elena," she said, tilting her head. "What a surprise. I'd like to talk." She hesitated for a second. Then, "Of course. Come in." The house was exactly as I remembered it, too clean, too quiet, a curated museum of neutral tones and expensive restraint. Paul was in the sunroom, reading the Wall Street Journal. He looked up but didn't stand. "Elena, I need to talk to both of you," I said, standing in the doorway. Diane poured herself coffee. "Is this about Caleb? Grant said you moved out." "This isn't about Caleb." I looked directly at my father. "This is about Lillian." The silence in the room changed, thicker, heavier. Diane set her cup down a little too hard. "Lillian's sick," I continued. "Stage 4 ovarian cancer." "I'm sorry to hear that," Paul said, eyes narrowing. "She also told me the truth." A pause. "What truth?" Diane asked, her voice flat. "I'm her daughter. You adopted me, quietly, illegally if we're being honest. You've lied to me my entire life." Diane blinked. "That's absurd." Paul folded his newspaper slowly. "I think you've misunderstood." "I've got documentation," I snapped, pulling out the envelope. "Birth certificate, letter of relinquishment, affidavits. Do you want to see them, or should I read them aloud?" "No need to be theatrical," Diane said, eyes cold now. "Yes, we adopted you, but we raised you. We gave you everything. You gave me proximity," I said. "Not love." "You're being emotional," Paul said. I laughed. "You think this is emotional?" "No, emotional would be screaming. This is clarity." "I think you should leave," Diane said sharply. "Come back when you're thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have," I replied, my voice low. "You took a child and never intended to love her as your own. You raised me like an obligation. You watched me break myself trying to earn something that should have been given freely. And when I finally understand why, when I finally have the truth, you act like I've brought shame to your house instead of honesty." They said nothing, so I walked out. No slamming doors, no sobbing theatrics. Just silence. But that silence was a blade, and I was done bleeding. That night it started to snow. I drove back to the city, watching the flakes swirl across my windshield like ghosts with nowhere to go. I should have gone straight home. I should have rested, but instead I went to the office. I needed something normal, something logical. I stayed late, too late. At some point, my business partner, Nico, called to check on a code deployment. He asked if I was okay. I lied, said I had a headache, said I'd go home soon. I didn't. It was almost midnight when I finally left. The snow had turned to sleet, and the roads shimmered under the streetlights like ice-slicked ribbons. The crash wasn't cinematic. It was sudden, brutal. A drunk driver ran a red light on Western Avenue and T-boned me at full speed. My last thought before everything went black was that I never got to tell Lillian thank you. When I woke up, it felt like breathing fire. My lungs were sharp with every inhale, like I'd been pulling air through crushed glass. My chest was heavy, ribs bound, throat raw. The overhead lights were too bright, too white, cutting through my eyelids even when closed. I couldn't move, not properly. My left arm was strapped to a brace, my legs numb with a humming pain that hadn't yet turned into agony, but was waiting to. And then, voices. Soft, clinical, echoing. "She's waking up. Get Dr. Chen." "Elena? Can you hear me?" I blinked. A woman's face entered my blurred view. Brown eyes, gentle but alert. She wore no makeup, had short curly hair tucked under a navy blue scrub cap, and something about her gaze reminded me of Lillian, not in appearance, but in that quiet, stubborn grace. "You're at St. Anne's," she said gently. "You were in a car accident, but you're safe now." I tried to speak, but the pain hit too fast, like someone had scraped the inside of my throat with sandpaper. I gagged, coughed, panicked. Tubes, machines, noise. "Easy," the nurse said, placing a hand on mine. "Don't fight it. You're on a ventilator, but we're going to start weaning you off now." I didn't know her name yet, but that voice, that calm, anchored me. Later, I would learn it belonged to Emily Davis, trauma nurse, former Army medic. The woman who, while I lay in a coma and my own parents walked away, stayed beside me every shift. The days that followed were a blur of sterile white walls, beeping machines, charts, pokes, vitals, monitors, dull pain and sharp pain, and waves of exhaustion that came without warning. But there were also moments of unbearable clarity, like the first time I could move my fingers again, and the nurse said, "Squeeze if you can hear me," and I did, and she cried. Or the first time I opened my eyes fully, and Emily told me, softly but firmly, "You're not alone. Not anymore." I couldn't speak, not yet. But the rage inside me had a pulse, a steady, quiet beat. Because I remembered, not everything, but enough. Enough to know that Paul and Diane had walked in, heard the prognosis, and refused to help. Enough to know that I had been left to die, not metaphorically, not emotionally, but literally, by the two people who claimed to raise me. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, hooked up to 1,000 wires, wondering what kind of parents could do that. And the answer always came, cold and cruel. They weren't my parents. Not really. They had only ever been actors in the roles of caregivers, playing the long game of social performance. And when the mask cracked, they fled the stage. Emily never brought it up unless I asked. But one day, as she adjusted my IV, she said quietly, "They told the doctors you weren't really their daughter, that they weren't responsible." I turned my head to look at her. My mouth could finally form words, slow and scratchy. "Did they sound sorry?" Emily paused, then shook her head. "They sounded tired, inconvenienced, like being asked to care for you was a mistake they didn't want to claim." I didn't cry. Not then. I just nodded, like that version of the story had already existed inside me, and her words confirmed what I had known all my life but never dared to name. Later that afternoon, Nico arrived. He looked exhausted and angry and slightly wild-eyed, like a man who'd spent days fighting fires without sleep. He hugged me gently, sat beside my bed, and pulled out a laptop. "I have bad news and worse news," he said. I blinked. "The bad news," he continued, "is your parents, Paul and Diane, have already filed legal paperwork to claim emergency control over your assets. They told the court you're mentally incapacitated and unable to manage your own estate." I tried to sit up but winced. Pain lit up my spine. He pressed a hand to my shoulder. "Easy. Save your strength." "And the worst news?" I asked, voice hoarse. "They're also trying to access Lillian's will, claiming she was mentally unstable when she left you the house. They want it frozen. They're playing dirty, Elena." I stared at the wall. "They left me to die, Nico." "I know." "They walked out of that room." "I know. And now they want the money." He didn't say anything, just nodded. I clenched my fist slowly against the blanket. "They can have nothing," I whispered. "They already took my childhood. They're not taking her memory." Nico smiled faintly. "Now that sounds like the Elena I know." But I didn't feel like myself. Not yet. Because every movement, every breath still hurt. Because my body was fractured and stitched together with steel and pins and staples. And my heart, my trust, was worse than broken. It was rewritten. Emily returned with a clipboard and fresh saline. She smiled at Nico, then looked at me. "We're moving you out of ICU tomorrow. Your scans look good, you're a fighter." I nodded slowly, but what I wanted to say was this. I wasn't fighting for recovery. I was fighting for truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to do it alone. Recovery is not a straight line. I learned that the hard way. Some mornings I'd wake up in the hospital thinking I could walk again, that I'd swing my legs over the bed like nothing had happened, like the crash had been a nightmare that didn't break my body or rip open the last threads of my illusions. But then I'd try to sit up, and fire would shoot down my spine, wrapping around my ribs, reminding me exactly where I was. Other days I'd lie still, watching the light crawl across the ceiling, too numb to feel anything but the weight of abandonment. But through it all, there were two constants: Emily and Nico. Emily, my nurse, my advocate, my guardian angel in blue scrubs, talked to me like I was a person, not a patient. She brushed my hair when I was too weak to lift my arms, played soft music on her phone during shift changes, and never once pitied me. Only saw me, held space for my anger without trying to shrink it. Nico, business partner turned best friend by sheer fire, visited every day, laptop under one arm, and a legal pad full of names and questions under the other. He was building a case even before I could sit up straight. "They're coming for everything," he said one afternoon, voice low, eyes dark with fury. "Not just your inheritance. They're spinning a story that you're unstable, erratic, unfit to manage your affairs." "They left me to die," I rasped. "I know. And now they want to paint me as the villain." "They're terrified," he replied, "because they know the truth is louder than any narrative they try to sell." The truth arrived in a cream envelope with my name in slanted cursive. It came with the hospital courier, hand-delivered, marked, "For Elena when the time is right." Inside, a letter from Lillian and a bundle of official documents: my birth certificate, original and amended, adoption papers, a notarized statement outlining the verbal agreement between her and Paul and Diane, property deeds, and a final handwritten page, folded like a secret she'd been keeping her whole life. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then I didn't find the courage to tell you in person. For that, I'm sorry. But I want you to know this. I have never stopped loving you. You are not a mistake. You are the greatest decision I ever made, even if it didn't look like that for many years. I was 19 and scared, and Paul and Diane offered a solution that I thought was love. I believed they would raise you with care, that keeping you in the family meant you'd never feel the sting of being given up. But I see now I was naive, and I am sorry I let them treat you like something borrowed instead of someone cherished. The house is yours, so is the truth. I hope you use both well. With all my love, Mom. I read it twice, then again, tears soaking the page, hot and relentless. Not because I was broken, but because someone had finally seen me, claimed me, loved me out loud. That same week, Nico arranged a meeting with James Wright, Lillian's longtime attorney. James was everything I expected a man of 70 to be. Pressed vest, slow deliberate speech, and eyes like a courtroom, sharp, tired, and unimpressed by performance. He looked at me, not like a victim but like a client. I've reviewed the will, he said. Your parents, Paul and Diane, have filed an emergency motion for conservatorship. They're claiming you're unfit to manage Lillian's estate. Let me guess, I said bitterly, based on the accident and my emotional instability. Precisely. They think I'll just roll over. James smiled faintly. Then they haven't been paying attention. We spent the next 2 hours mapping a plan. I signed medical releases. Nico provided bank statements showing I'd already resumed work on a limited basis. Emily wrote an affidavit detailing my cognitive state and ability to make informed decisions. And then James handed me a flash drive. Security footage from the hospital, he said, the night they refused treatment. I stared at it. They didn't know. They knew. But they assumed no one would watch. They assumed no one would believe you. They don't realize I'm not fighting alone anymore. Then let's make sure they learn. Back at the hospital, I watched the footage. It was worse than I remembered, even though I hadn't been conscious. My parents' voices, calm and calculated. She's not really ours. We owe her nothing. Surely there's some state fund for people like her. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the dismissiveness, the complete erasure. Like I was a stranger who'd wandered into their lives and expected too much. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I opened a document on Nico's laptop and began to type. A letter. Not to them, not this time. To the court, to the public record. To anyone who'd ever been told family was something fixed, immovable, inescapable. Family is not defined by blood or law. It is defined by presence, by love, by showing up when it matters. I may not be Paul and Diane's biological child, but I was theirs in every way that counted, until they chose to abandon me. I may not have grown up knowing the truth, but I know it now, and I will not be silent about it. This letter is not for revenge. It is for restoration, for clarity, for any girl who sat in her room wondering why her parents couldn't love her the way they loved everyone else. This is for the silenced, the disregarded, the daughters who were never called daughters at all. I am not asking for validation. I am declaring my value. I am Elena Carter. I survived not because of them, but in spite of them. And I will not apologize for speaking truth where there was only silence before. I printed it, signed it, handed it to James. Include it in the court file, I said. I want it in the official record. You're sure? He asked. Yes, I'm done hiding. The next morning I was discharged. Emily wheeled me to the front, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. You take care of yourself, Elena, she said. You're braver than most people ever get the chance to be. You saved me, I replied. No, she said. You saved yourself. I just held the flashlight. Outside, Nico waited with the car. The wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, but the cold reminded me I was alive. Still here. Still fighting. We drove straight to Hyde Park. Lillian's house was old and sprawling, with creaking wood floors and dust motes that danced in the afternoon sun. But it felt more like home than any place I'd lived in my entire life. I walked through the front door, cane in one hand, pain in every joint, but something else too. Purpose. We changed the locks, installed cameras, called a security firm. They'll come, I said. Let them, Nico answered. I turned the living room into my command center. Blueprints, legal files, a whiteboard timeline, witness lists. Every email from Diane with passive-aggressive digs. Every photo of me bruised in that hospital bed. Not for pity, for evidence. The truth doesn't need to scream, it just needs to be seen. And I was ready to show it to the world. 3 days after they walked out of Lillian's house, I received a message that surprised me more than it should have. I don't expect you to forgive me, but if you'd let me buy you coffee, I'll sit and listen. Grant. It was short, simple, cautious. The kind of message written by someone who had no idea what the answer might be, but sent it anyway because the silence had become unbearable. I sat with it for nearly an hour. There had been a time in our childhood when Grant and I weren't rivals or strangers. There had been weekends where we built blanket forts, watched cartoons too early in the morning, and shared whispered secrets long after the lights went out. But somewhere along the way, the affection that could have grown between us had been eclipsed by what our parents didn't say, by the hierarchy of affection we both learned to navigate in different ways. He climbed to the top. I learned how to disappear. And yet, I didn't delete the message. Cambridge Cafe. 9 a.m., 1 hour. Don't expect anything more. I hit send. The next morning, I walked into the cafe with a limp and a cane, and a mind already prepared to leave the moment I felt disrespected. But Grant stood when I entered, pulled out my chair, and didn't speak until I sat down. That was something. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. Lines around the eyes, thinner hair, a posture that hinted at someone who had recently realized the world wasn't built around him. He folded his hands on the table like a man waiting for a verdict. I don't know how to start, he said. Then don't. Just speak. He nodded slowly. I watched the video. The whole thing. I didn't know they said that. I didn't know how far they'd gone. But you knew something was off, I said. Yes, he admitted without flinching. I knew they treated you like an obligation. I knew they praised me louder, forgave me faster. I just told myself you didn't care, that you didn't need it. I did, I said, my voice quieter than I meant. I just learned not to show it. He looked down, then back at me. I'm sorry, not just for what they did, for what I didn't do. I didn't forgive him, not then. But I didn't walk away either. That was something too. When I stood to leave, he didn't ask for more. He simply said, thank you for showing up. And I understood that for once, he knew how much that choice cost. That afternoon, James called. I recognized his tone before he even spoke the words. Firm, satisfied, almost reverent. It's done. The court had ruled in my favor. Conservatorship denied, estate upheld, Paul and Diane's motions dismissed with prejudice. In the ruling, the judge cited their behavior as a coordinated attempt to exploit a moment of medical crisis for personal gain. I closed my eyes and let those words settle into the cracks where doubt used to live. Later that evening, I walked through the house alone, letting the past echo in every room. I touched the piano keys Lillian never played, ran my fingers along the wood paneling in the hallway, and opened windows that hadn't been touched in months. The house, like me, was still healing, but no longer empty. It was strange, rebuilding a life from ashes that hadn't yet cooled. But I was learning, one decision at a time. I painted the study, took down the curtains in the living room, donated the old china sets, and bought a mismatched collection of mugs from a thrift store, every single one chipped or imperfect in some small, beautiful way. Emily brought over dinner the following Friday, a spicy lentil soup and too much bread. She stayed to help unpack the last boxes in the library, and when I found a copy of Jane Eyre with my name scribbled in childish handwriting on the back cover, we both sat quietly for a long moment, as if mourning something neither of us could quite name. You're not the same woman I met in that hospital, she said finally. No, I replied. She didn't know she had a future. Nico came by on Sunday with wine and gossip and a whiteboard full of updates from our company. He'd kept the ship sailing while I lay unconscious, and somehow our business had not only survived, it had expanded. You should come back, he said. I will. But not as the old me. James Wright stopped in on Tuesday. I invited him for dinner. He wore his usual vest and a faint look of amusement as he watched me stir risotto like I hadn't been in a coma just weeks earlier. You've built something here, he said, sipping a second glass of wine. I didn't build it, I said. It showed up for me. I just stayed long enough to notice. The table that night was full. Emily, Nico, James, even Grant, eventually. There was laughter and warmth and clinking glasses and the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Somewhere between dessert and goodbye, it hit me. This was family. Not the kind that raises you under obligation, not the kind that counts blood but not bruises, but the kind that looks at you and says, "I see you, I stayed." After everyone left, I found myself alone again, but it didn't feel lonely. I walked out onto the porch, the one Lillian had claimed as her sanctuary. I sat on the swing, a blanket draped over my shoulders, and let the night settle around me. My phone buzzed. A message from someone who had read the blog post I published days earlier. My story, written in my own words, no edits, no filters. I thought I was the only one who grew up feeling like a guest in my own home. Thank you. The message blurred as my eyes welled. Not with grief, but recognition. I opened my laptop and began typing again. Not to defend myself, not to convince a judge, but to speak, to tell anyone out there, anyone who ever questioned if they were lovable, wanted, real, that they were not alone. There will be people who call you family and still leave you bleeding on the hospital floor. But there will also be people who sit beside you through the darkness, hold your hand even when it's shaking, and tell you the truth without flinching. Those people, keep them, feed them, love them back. Because sometimes the family you build, brick by fragile brick, is stronger than the one you were born into. And healing doesn't ask for permission. It begins the moment you choose yourself. When I posted it, I didn't think much of it. But the comments came, slow at first, then steady, then all at once. People telling their stories. People saying, "Me too." People who had been invisible their whole lives, suddenly finding their voice. And now if you've read this far, or listened this far, I want to say something directly to you. If something in this story made your chest tighten, or brought up something you've tucked away for years, I hope you'll stay. I hope you'll leave a comment, whether it's one word or a whole paragraph, because someone else out there might need to know they're not the only one either. And if this story reminded you of something true about yourself, your strength, your worth, your quiet survival, then maybe, just maybe, click that subscribe button. Not because I need a number on a page, but because this isn't the end of the conversation. This is where we start rewriting what love, family, and home really mean. Together. Thank you for listening, for staying, for seeing me. And above all, thank you for choosing to stay when others walked away.